Hi, this is Brett Flory with Innovative Data Solutions. Thank you for joining us today for this IDS Technology Whiteboard session. We here at IDS are constantly looking for the most cutting-edge IT solutions and information to address your technical and financial needs, and we bring them to you as quickly as we can find them. As you may already know, the idea behind these whiteboard sessions is to educate and empower you with up-to-date IT solution data. Today, we'll be discussing exclusive strategies to revolutionize JD Edwards on IBM I and slash your IT costs. We're going to look at behind the scenes on how Denovo's managed services are reshaping JD Edwards on IBM I. We'll examine how companies are leveraging these services to boost efficiency, cut costs, and elevate service levels, all while gaining a competitive edge. The goals of the webinar are to discover the latest JD Edwards updates that can transform your operations. Learn how over 250 JD Edwards customers are optimizing their systems for success. See how Denovo helps business lower risk, reduce costs, and improve service delivery. And how you can too. We'll hear a case study of a global enterprise using Denovo's services to slash IT costs and maximize performance. But before we get into today's content, let me begin with just a bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available on demand in the cloud. You'll receive an email with a link to access the presentation after we complete post-production. At the end of today's presentation, we'll have a question and answer session. You are encouraged to ask questions at any time through the chat or the Q&A window so that when we get to the Q&A session, we'll be ready to respond to your questions. Your questions are important, and we do appreciate them. We highly encourage you to tell us also what you think about this entire session today. So what we're going to ask you to do at the end is set up just a few minutes with us to sit down and understand a little bit more about your environment and maybe some of the ideas that Denovo is bringing to the table today to help you in your JD Edwards environment. So please pay attention at the end of the session to learn how to connect with us. Joining me today is Paul Shearer, Vice President, Solution Engineering at Denovo, and Karin Wagner, Director of Quality at Denovo. Paul's an expert at JDE from many aspects, especially solving the challenges of clients like you on a daily basis. He's an expert in IBM systems, and he is very, very knowledgeable. You'll definitely enjoy his content today. Paul's been everything from a practice manager to a solution engineering VP and everything in between. We also have Karin, who's been all things JDE for decades, an end user, a manager of end users, a business analyst, a process analyst, a developer, a software architect, a trainer, a consultant, a project manager. So she's got really deep experience in financial, distribution, and HCM suites of products in both World and Enterprise One. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Paul and Karin, and they're going to take you through the content today. I will, in all fairness, tell you that we are having a little bit of technical difficulty today, so it may not go perfectly, but we will definitely get it up on the screen here for you and make sure that you get all your questions answered as we go through the session today. So I believe I'm going to be turning things over to Paul to kick things off, and Karin, you're going to run the slides. Is that right?
I'm about to load them up now and share. Yes.
Okay. All right. So, Paul, do you want to just do a quick intro and maybe set the stage so that everybody understands a little bit more about what we're talking about today?
Sure, absolutely. So while Karin is sharing out her screen, the presentation today is largely going to be broken into two very large themes. Karin will be presenting first and is really going to be doing a deep dive on the JD Edwards application itself. So at the end of the day, I'm a technologist. I get very excited about the technology, the IBM systems that we're using, how we maximize availability, etc. But at the end of the day, that's just the system the applications are running on. The applications and how your organizations use them is what drives the business value for your organizations. And Karin's really going to be doing a deep dive on a lot of the recent innovation that's coming out from JD Edwards within this particular product line. Hey, Karin, could you put your put the slides into full screen mode?
So these are the technical difficulties we're having. So we appreciate your patience as we're figuring all this out today. We had
So
I'm
if
sure you
there's two
guys can appreciate it.
monitors, if there's
Yeah,
two
we
You got
monitors
it.
you can share,
Got it.
you'll always pick the wrong one. At least that's my
we
experience.
and poor Karin had to reboot like three seconds before we went on the air today. So I'm sure you guys can appreciate what she's going through right now.
Everyone see it okay now?
We can. That looks beautiful.
Great.
So our agenda today, we won't belabor this too much as we've already discussed it. Go ahead to the next slide. So why Denovo? And we'll keep the commercial here very short. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of other providers out there that provide similar services to what we do. And what differentiates us and what's a really crowded market. And at the end of the day, it comes back to our culture. And everything that we do is centered around the customer. Basically, making sure that we put the customer first. Now, it's really easy to say that, but how do you demonstrate that? Can you go to the next slide, Karin? And we do that through something which is called Net Promoter Score. And so, just a little bit of background on this metric. Within our particular industry, the average Net Promoter Score is somewhere between 18 to 28. Denovo's got over 77. And the reason is because literally everything that we do is centered around the customer. Every 2 weeks, we meet as a company, and one of the questions that gets asked by our CEO is about what the customer experience is. And what he's really trying to drill down into is not the things that we got right, but where are the misses? Where are the things, the instances where we've caused a customer pain? And how do we make sure that that never occurs again? And we'll get a little bit more into this from a technology perspective as we talk about the Denovo risk management framework in a little bit. But when talking about Denovo and why use Denovo versus a lot of the other options that you've got out there, it really comes back to our focus and our values as a company. Next slide.
All right. So I'm Karin. I'm glad everyone's here. As Brett introduced me, I have been in G Edwards for a number of decades now. And today my slides are going to cover the functionality side of it. And as Paul gets really excited about the servers and the technology, I'm very excited about the functionality part. This is the last 24 plus years of J Edwards Enterprise One. Started as XC and now is in 9.2. The new names of annual releases are all now on 64-bit. There have been 59 application updates since 9.2 in 2016. So they are continually updating JD Edwards in Enterprise One. Something that's very exciting for everyone who is on Enterprise 1.9.2 is that there's no more need to check, am I on the version that's going to be supported long term? Are my W2s and 1099 is going to be supported? Once you're on 9.2, you're set. You're done. And there's a website. I have a link here that I can that is on Learn JDE to show each of the announcements over the years. There is a beautiful path that was created by JD Edwards and continues to be improved by Oracle on moving from World into E1 or Enterprise One. This is the document ID. I'll pause just a second in case someone wanted to write this one down, but it shows literally the step-by-step guide of how to get to E1. Now, I was one of those users. I started in the mid-90s on World, and I did that transition. It is impactful and can be emotional, but it's still JD Edwards at its heart. So if you're about to embark on that, it's an awesome journey, and I hope we can be part of it. So as far as release 22,
Hey,
23, and
Karin,
24, yes, sir.
and it's probably worth mentioning the support for customers that are on World, in that product is end of life at this point. You have to do something different. It's no
Mhm.
longer, there's no longer going to be new versions. I jokingly say anybody that is sitting on A7 III today, I want to congratulate you. It was the holy grail of return on investment. You have milked that for everything it was worth. I want to shake your hand. But you're at the point you got to do something else.
Now, the reason I'm highlighting, thank you, Paul. The reason I'm highlighting 22, 23, and 24 is because Oracle's done a really good job of packaging and um, bundling the release information on these releases since they rebranded and stopped just calling them an update number. This is the 22 is the year basically, but there's the websites themselves. In Learn JDE, there's 22, 23, and in 24 I have to navigate there. Just to give you an idea, if you wanted to do a deep dive on the particular module and into that particular enhancement, when you go to the website, if you click on a particular area, it'll pop open with those major improvements and enhancements that Oracle wants to share with the world. This is scratching the surface of what they do in these enhancements. There are hundreds of improvements and tweaks and fixes, but these are the biggies that Oracle wants to share. And then when you click on one particular one, say this product catalog here, it will open up a small window where you can click on quick tour, tutorial, guide, and even download that product information itself from the download center. Now, once this particular window opens up, it will talk about that. It'll have a video on those particular items. Now, something I wanted to highlight is you can take the lookup search right there and search over any release, and it'll give you those videos that the content Oracle has created. Now, all that is to say, and showing you the life of JD Edwards so far over the last 24 plus years, people have been upgrading all along, yes. But now 9.2 being 9.2 and being updated, companies are taking more and more advantage of their JD Edwards investment by using all the on-the-glass tools, such as orchestrations and extensibility. Now, those are fancy big words basically to say you don't have to use batch programming in the typical sense of UBEs anymore. You don't have to create development in the developer world to code and promote those things anymore. That can be done with just URL access. And because there's so much now available on the web in JD Edwards, companies are able to reduce a lot of third-party softwares that JD already has in it. And the last thing I wanted to note, there's Oracle provided dashboards and graphics that are out of the box, and more companies are embracing that because it's so easy to set up and share with employees. And it's definitely improving employees' satisfaction with the experience with JD Edwards. For those who have heard of XE and seen it, it has a look and feel that's very sterile. But JD Edwards now in 9.2, there's graphical representations of your data, very searchable and query. And I have definitely seen an uptick in employees being happy with it as it's grown. Now, for those modules in JD Edwards that still are not, I'll say, 21st century, for example, budgeting in JD Edwards has never been fully automated. And for those modules that JDE lacks power in, I'm also seeing a trend in our JDE folks using Oracle's Fusion Cloud applications as bolt-ons and complementing JD Edwards. The big ones are budgeting and the planning. So that this one vertical here. And the other one is in HCM. There's some difficulty with using Jade Edwards competency management. There really isn't really solid career development, and that's another one I'm seeing a lot of, where Jade Edwards companies are taking advantage of the things that Oracle's really does well at to fulfill and round out the full ERP experience. Now, these are some helpful hints. Now, these are hyperlinks, so they're not really available, but the shortcut literally is just, the website is learnjde.com. And from there, all of these links are available. There's also a compare releases, which is very useful to see what by release, what has been created in a list format. And to keep up to date with JD Edwards in general and Enterprise One, we do a weekly posting. It's Thursdays. It includes tips and tricks, technical updates, new release information. We're doing a lot on release 25. We started last week. We do special deep dives on certain functionalities such as workflow, notifications, and there's how-to videos in there as well. So we're going to pause for a second in case you wanted to scan that to jump to the Ask Denovo, and subscribe so you can get an email every Thursday saying, hey, here's the new Ask Denovo for this week.
Hey, Karin, so before we get into the topic I'm going to cover, I had a question for you on those Oracle Fusion Cloud apps. So, people are looking at trying to extend their JD Edwards investment. Customers are fanatical about JD Edwards. We love it more
Yes, we
than
are.
anyone should rationally love an ERP system. Now, my understanding is a lot of these apps you can actually integrate into JDE itself using like Cafe One and some other stuff. So it all still has a very native look and feel.
Yes, you can show websites directly in the JDE windows themselves. Now, as far as the EPM and the budgeting, and well, HCM as well, I was on a project a couple years ago that plugged in the HCM, the talent management, and it speaks to JDE the whole time. So if anyone is hired, it feeds JDE. Someone is let go, it feeds backwards. But all the data in JDE is also feeding the talent management data sets, so it can do those types of things like career development and do performance um, uh, management and ratings. And those ratings can then feed back to JD Edwards to take advantage of job promotions and things like that. So it can not only speak to JD Edwards back and forth and share that data between the two, but also be represented inside the JDE application itself.
I know a lot of customers historically within the JDE ecosystem, they also had Hyperion because they would have a whole bunch of other
Yep.
systems out there. And they'd use Hyperion to try to consolidate things. What type of
That's a good point. This is
uptick have you
Hyperion.
seen on
Yes.
EPM?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. EPM is the new name of Hyperion. It is one and the same. But
Cool. Well, I appreciate that.
Mhm.
If you could advance back to the Denovo risk management framework. So basically, this is kind of a view of how Denovo approaches risk, specifically from a technology perspective. Because all of these cool capabilities that you're getting within JD Edwards, you can only use them if they're up and they're running, and to a lesser degree if your system is performant. So how do you go about making sure that all of this happens? So next slide. So at a highest level, what we do is we want to bake everything down to what we call a raw risk score. And this isn't something that you're going to use between categories to compare risk, but within a specific category, it's just a framework that we use to compare risk of different architectural decisions, different hardware investments, Why Denovo, for instance, made a very, very large capital investment in IBM's new Power 10 infrastructure. So what's kind of some of the reasoning behind that? And that all comes down to this raw risk score. So what's composing that is the three elements there on the left. MTTF, or mean time between failure. So how likely is it, or how long between failures are you going to wait before you see the next one? Blast radius. So when a failure happens, who's getting affected? And then mean time to resolution. When a failure happens, how long does it take to recover from that? How long before things are back up and operational? And this seems very straightforward, but there's a lot of nuance to it that we'll get into as we continue. Next slide. So mean time between failures. So we're expressing this as how many occurrences of a failure can we be expecting over a 5-year period? So for example, if I'm talking about a single VM running either on the cloud or running on a hypervisor, I'm going to expect about 3.9 occurrences of a failure of that VM within a 5-year period. Now, if I'm talking about an IBM LPAR, that number drops significantly. So I'm looking at 1.1 failure over a 5-year period. Failure of a single virtualization host. Maybe you're running a VMware environment on-prem today. You've got an ESX host up and running. How often can you expect that to fail? Well, just a little under 2 failures over a 5-year period. Failure of an entire storage array. So depending on the technology, and there's a very big asterisk there, because of the redundancy that gets built into the storage array, you can typically expect that to fail once in a decade. Or if you're talking about a tier 4 data center, about 0.2 failures within a 5-year period, or well less than a once in a decade event, once in 2 decades. Now, the key thing to note is I did say a tier 4 data center. So if you have a server closet within your own facility today, your availability numbers are going to be a lot lower than kind of that tier 4 data center that I described. And then even within discrete data centers, you've got lower available options. Typically, tier 4 is what you're always going to want to look for to maximize that availability. Because the other thing to be thinking about is when I talked about the failure of that single VM, that 3.9, if the entire data center goes down, everything that's in that data center has also got down. So a lot of these things are cumulative in terms of the risk. And at the end of the day, we're looking at the very top of the stack, the application, going, okay, what's everything sitting below it that's got to be up, has got to be online, has got to be available to make sure that we're able to continue to run JD Edwards and execute these critical business processes. Next slide. So blast radius. So basically what this is about is when the failure occurs, how big of a deal is it? So we talked about a VM before. 3.9 failures of that VM we're expecting over a 5-year period. Well, depending on what that VM is doing is going to determine how big the blast radius is. And so within the JD Edwards world, I'll use the example of WebLogic versus the database server. And this ties back to something which is called a hard dependency or a soft dependency. And what you can think of a hard dependency as is when a hard dependency goes down, everything sitting on top of that hard dependency also goes down. Now, a soft dependency would be like your WebLogic server. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So let's say we had a failure of an individual WebLogic server. Well, in this particular example, we've still got 4 other WebLogic servers that are up and running here. So you've lost one of the servers, about 20% of your capacity in this example. However, those users that have gotten booted are able to immediately get back into the application. So users were impacted, but the application itself didn't go down. So this has got a very small blast radius associated with this type of failure. Next slide. Now we'll contrast that with the database going down. So just as a reminder for everyone, kind of your 3 database options for JD Edwards are going to be IBM DB2, SQL Server, or Oracle database. So where we're talking about the Oracle database here, this would be your LPAR that JD Edwards is running on. So basically it would be handling your database functionality, and there to the right where it says JDE Enterprise Server. Typically those are going to be combined together running on that LPAR. If that goes down, or in the case of JD Edwards running on Oracle or SQL Server, if that's running on an individual VM, when that goes down, all of JD Edwards is down. That is a hard dependency. So that has got a very big blast radius because it's literally taken everything out. Next slide. So mean time to resolution, MTTR. So this is where we're going to be taking a look at when the specific failures occur. How long does it take us to recover from one? So for instance, if we have a WebLogic server and let's say there was a problem with patching and we need to roll back the patches, you know, we're probably going to be looking at in a mean time to getting tongue tied here, mean time to resolution of about an hour and a half. Now, on the other hand, if it's a go ahead and go to the next slide. If that same failure was on the database server, depending on the nature of the failure itself, it could take substantially longer. So let's say you're in a virtualized environment, and this could literally be x86 or IBM Power that we're talking about. And the physical hardware that LPAR or that VM is running on dies. Depending on how you're architected, you could have everything back online in less than 30 minutes. Now, if there's an issue with the patching, you know, that's going to be a longer outage window in terms of how long it takes to recover. Or, and this is a scenario that I actually see a lot more frequently than physical issues, are logical problems that are happening with the data. And this would be the scenario where the rogue user deletes data selection within JD Edwards and advances every work order in the system. And you're like, okay, we need to roll the entire system back to a point like 1 millisecond before the user did that. And then, but we also need to take the current data as it is now and protect it somewhere so that we can try to get out of it anything that's happened since we discovered the problem, but get the system back to where it was before. Well, that recovery length is entirely going to be dependent on how big is the data. You know, small data, a couple 100 gig database is very, very fast. You start talking multi-terabyte databases, you're measuring things within an hour. So understanding the nature of the outage is really really important to really kind of getting down to that MTTR number. Next slide. So going back to what I talked about before, failure of a single VM. So this is where we said we're going to expect the 3.9 failures of an individual VM within a 5-year period. So each of these 3 scenarios that I'm showing here on the rows, so the soft dependency WebLogic server, hard dependency database server, or hard dependency database server using local NVMe storage. All of them have the exact same failure rate on them. But what's very different is the blast radius. So that WebLogic server has got a much smaller blast radius because, again, it's not going to take down the application. It's just going to reduce the capacity of the application itself. You know, compared to the database server, which has got that hard dependency, so it's taking everything down. It's got a blast radius of 100. And then same thing for the hard dependency, the database server with local NVMe. And you can see the blast radius between those last two options is the same. It's going to take everything down when it occurs. Now, the last thing is mean time to resolution. So first two options, we're looking at about an hour and a half on average, depending on the nature of the failure. To get things back up and online. Looking at that last option though, mean time to resolution 24 hours. What is this about? Well, some things some providers have done in the past is literally taken virtual hosts, taken local NVMe storage, which is really, really high performance storage, very, very fast, but it only exists in that one host. And they'll put a database on it. And while that database is up and running, your system is on steroids. It's like you've fed the system meth. It is screaming, outperforming everything else. But like any individual that's taking meth, that's great while it lasts, but eventually you're going to pay for that. And how you're going to pay for that is when the crash occurs. It's going to take a long time to recover because that is a single point of failure. You just can't go over and start up that VM elsewhere. Next slide. So this was failure of a single x86 VM. Now let's compare this with IBM I. So again, over a 5-year period, 1.1 outage hour or occurrences of outages. Blast radius is 100. It's still going to take everything down. On average, 6 hours to recover. So very, very seldom do you have a problem. When you do have a problem, it takes a little bit longer to get things back up. So risk score 220. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So this is kind of comparing all of those options. So we're taking that hard dependency for the database, the local with NVMe, that really bad option that some, because of performance, are going to be tempted to do. Massively high risk score, 9,360. Local x86 database, much more manageable, 585. And IBM I platform, as Denovo, would architect it within one of our data centers. And that's a very important caveat. If you just have one sitting in a closet somewhere in a warehouse, your numbers are going to be very different. But in our case, with how we architect it, 220, or about half the risk score of what you've got on that x86 VM. Next slide. And actually, let me go back to the previous slide for a second. So talking strictly outside of a JD Edwards context, if you have a database server and you are able to take very large outage windows and you need to optimize for performance, that top option might be an appropriate solution for you. And I'll stress again, outside of JD Edwards, you would never want to do this with your JD Edwards database. The middle option for customers that are very cost conscious and are really wanting to optimize things around economics, this would be a great solution for you. People that really have to have the application up and running and available, your 24/7 global manufacturing, you want to be looking at an engineered solution. So either IBM I or on the Oracle side, something like Exadata. Those are the solutions where you're going to get the best availability for your overall system. Next slide, Karin. So this is basically taking a look within our data center, how we go about architecting this. So within the data center, we would have two different Powerton systems that we've laid out here, and this is showing it logically within from a single customer's perspective. So I've got the two power systems, and then I've got the LPAR sitting on top of it. Well, below those power systems, I've got storage arrays, and you'll notice I've got two of those as well. So basically what I'm wanting to do all the way up and down the stack is I'm wanting to isolate it. I'm wanting to be fault decorrelated those two stacks from each other. So if something is happening to one stack, it's not affecting the other stack. And then on top of that is IBM's hypervisor, Power VM. And then we'll basically have two different methods that we're providing resiliency to customers. So the first is going to be leveraging Power VM, where we do live partition mobility, where we can take an LPAR from that's running on one set of physical hardware and move that over so that's running on the other set of physical hardware. So that way we got a hardware failure. If it's a scheduled thing where we can see there's a problem, we know we've got to take it down, we can do that in advance. If there's just a hard failure, it's automatically going to go over, but it's immediately going to come back up. And then the other option that we have is with Mimics, where again, completely isolated set of infrastructure, but we have this other replicated LPAR out there that we're using it for both high availability, also for running our backups off of. So whenever we're doing that backup load, that's not impacting our customers' performance, because sometimes impacting performance can become an availability issue. The system's up and running, but it's performing so badly that maybe you've got trucks starting to pile up at the warehouse, and we never want to be the cause of that occurring. So we architect things accordingly. So thinking about this from the x86 side, because as much as we love the IBM I platform, as much as we love OS 400, at the end of the day, there's x86 components to these solutions that have got to be up and running. And again, you want to take the same approach. You want to have isolated hardware stacks that are fault decorrelated from each other, and then take things where you have soft dependencies and split those between the stacks. So, all of my odd server WebLogic servers are running on one stack. All of my even servers are running on the other stack. Next slide. So that was it on availability and how Denovo looks at it, both in terms of kind of thinking through everything from the data center level up, but also within the overall framework of what are some of the other types of risks that you have within your organization if you are IBM I today. One of the things that we don't specifically have a slide on, but is a very important risk to call out, and that really ties into the application managed services that I'm about to talk about, is a demographic risk that a lot of organizations face with your IBM I administrator, with your RPG programmer. And literally, we've got a customer that we're working with today. Their RPG programmer is retiring. He's 85. And he's tried retiring 3 times before. The organization keeps begging him not to, because there's continued demand on these resources out there, these highly skilled engineers. but there's a diminishing supply. And that's really one of the big areas where Denovo's application managed services can really help de-risk things, not just from the technology standpoint that I was talking about before, but from the people standpoint, from the demographic standpoint, where this skill set is literally retiring today as we speak. And that's basically let us take that risk, let us assume that for you. Our application managed services largely fall into these four different buckets: operational services, release management services, things like upgrades, functional support, technical support, and enhancement support. So most of what I'll talk about is generally on the operations side as well as the technical side, about half of number two. Karin, can you talk a little bit about the functional support, the enhancements, and just about how we approach release management?
So on the support side, functionally, the quotes there are the perfect way to describe what kind of functional support, because it varies if you ask a lot of other companies. How do I do something? Show me how to post a batch and help me do this, voucher entry. That is what Denovo offers in functional support. And obviously the main one that most companies look for assistance with, which is issue resolution. Something's broken, something isn't working, there's an error. But it's the application usage. And Denovo is very, very much focused on making sure you're taking advantage of JD Edwards, which is why we include show me how to use this screen. And a lot of companies don't do that. As far as release management goes, we will do unlimited product updates as part of our program. It's called Application Lifecycle Management.
So if I wanted to do a tools upgrade every quarter, I could do that?
Yep. Yes. You can do
Awesome.
tools upgrade, or our code currents are
Yeah,
most companies
that's the
will do code
application
currents
functional stuff. I want the technical goodness,
application.
the tools upgrade.
And there's been 22 tools releases since 2016, so you could have gotten all 22 of them. Yes, but the applications as well. And we do have one of our clients who've done quarterly updates. Whatever's available, they're getting those. So it includes retrofits, it includes the application testing support, and the enhancement services are anything that go above and beyond that. And that includes basically anything, including those things noted there. User training, development support, training on development activities, and any kind of process improvement initiatives, which are very, very popular to take advantage of what, you don't know what you don't know. And a lot of companies, the users were trained from the user before them, and that user was trained from the user before them. And maybe they don't realize what JDE can do. And a lot of those process improvement activities have brought up and highlighted functionality just not being tapped. So,
Kind of the old joke about companies running XE on 9.2.
yes, exactly that. That idea. And it's common for that to happen when you have a staff that you've been trained, the turnover that goes into any company, and not being able to go back to the basics every time. There's no time to do that usually, but having those moments of enhancement review and what did you know, JDE can do this now? Yes, it couldn't in
Oh,
XE.
kind of the whole decustomizing thing, for instance. A lot of the things that you used to have to customize, now you can go
Mhm.
vanilla on.
Yes, yes, a lot of that too.
So what are you doing with our customers today with Orchestrator?
Oh, that list is very long, but the highlights would be interfaces, removing the old time batch application that runs on a scheduled job, having Orchestrator sniff for files when they're deposited somewhere, um, the new workflow functionality. More and more people are gravitating to hear what that can do to automate those types of processes. Think of it like a macro in Excel that's in JD Edwards. Orchestrator and those extensibility options. The other thing that people are doing with Orchestrator is those functions that you have to do in a certain order for your business, not just the basics of defaulting something, but I always go and print a purchase order print. Well, instead of going to the purchase order print job that's over there in the menu tree, just print it. You create it, you look at it, and then there's a button print, and it does all those steps. So reducing the number of steps that you have to do for a particular function.
Kind of automating portions of business processes.
Like pieces of it. Exactly.
Cool.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go ahead and jump on, save a couple of minutes for Q&A here. We did get a question here from Bill. I don't know if you covered this in your material or not, but the question that he had was for the Oracle Fusion Cloud integration, is this through out-of-the-box APIs or through another solution or middleware?
It's out of the box between Oracle and JD Edwards. I saw that firsthand from the project I was on. There was a technical aspect of it where they had to make sure that like the services are talking to one another, but what feeds back and forth was already there. Our technical guy was on the project for, I want to say, on and off for about 2 weeks over the course of a month in just making sure everything was talking back and forth.
So you configure the integrations, you don't have to build them.
Correct.
Okay, perfect.
That's how that project was a few years ago. Yep.
Well, there was one other question that came in, and if anybody else has any questions as we're wrapping up here, please do type those into the chat or the Q&A panel at this time, and we'll make sure to get those answered for you. The other question.
One more thing.
Yeah.
One more thing I want to mention too. Hyperion has been plugged in to JD Edwards for years, so that one is just a even more natural plugin because it's been there for so long. But on the HCM side, that's the one that I was saying we did making sure the systems were speaking to one another. That was
okay.
the other part. So,
and given the number of Oracle Cloud applications that are out there, we probably ought to put an asterisk saying mileage will vary.
Yes, very good point, Paul. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, the other question that had come in so far is how hard is it to move from World to E1, and then kind of what does that time frame look like?
So I could start from a technical perspective and then let you finish off, Karen.
Okay.
From a technical perspective, it's a pretty easy move. You're basically going to do an E1 install. You're going to be leveraging the upgrade process that was designed to basically take your data from one to the other. Now, a lot of companies will also do things like platform changes at the same time, depending on if it's going to be a cloud type deployment. And that can add a little bit more complexity to it, differences in collation sequences, etc. But from a technical perspective, it's pretty straightforward. What about the user experience and the functional side of the project, Karin?
Well, the most common phrase that I have said when I've been on 6 so far, World to E1 migrations, and it's JD Edwards. So it's exactly the same, but it just looks really different. It's still the same phrases, the same glossary of terms. It's still UDC tables. But how you go about
FO902, FO911 are all still the same.
same. So it's exactly the same, but it's just totally different looking. So, but one dramatic change that Oracle did, JD Edwards did before Oracle, they rewrote AR completely. They wrote it from the ground up, and it more mirrors AP. So for those who are using accounts receivable, you know that invoicing and receiving is all in one table, and now it more mirrors AP, where there's invoicing and then receiving in two separate tables. That's I'm sure there are a couple other modules out there that they rebuilt from scratch, but that's probably one of the most commonly used across every world install that I've been on before, and as an end user. So because of that, that seems to be the most that's the biggest one that we focus on in conversions and moving the data from world over to E1. But as far as the experience itself, from being that person, it was, of course, any change is can be frustrating, but was so rewarding at the end to be able to do things that I wished I could have done in World, like easily extracting stuff to Excel, easily copy pasting into screens, um, it looking just more relevant and more current. And once Oracle introduced the graphical representations of the data, it was it was so exciting to see end users that were in their 20s, 30s, 40s finally saying, "Oh, JDE is finally current. It looks like my other applications that I use. It's more Excel, or it's more dashboard." Uh, that part as an end user and watching people and getting to show people how it goes, how it looks now in E1, it's exciting. And the typical time frame, there's the other part of that question. Um, they're typically 9 months to a year-ish. Miles may mileage may vary. Is that what you said, Paul?
Yeah, right.
It definitely depends, but that's been my experience so far because of the majority of that work is in so many of those one-off reports, the world writers, the fasters, the
RPG
queries that
code.
are built up, and moving those into E1. What are you going to do with them? Use the inquiry tools that are there? You probably should, instead of trying to build everything from scratch from custom reporting. But that takes a lot of time going through that analysis with users. So.
Okay, perfect. Well, you guys covered a lot of information very quickly and efficiently, so thank you very much. I want to keep rolling forward here to make sure we get everybody off to their meetings and calls at the top of the hour. So unless anybody else has a last-minute question, we'll move on to next steps here. I'll roll forward here. So
There's one more question.
was there another question? Oh, came in right at their last second. I didn't see it roll in. What, you want to read that one out?
What are phase complexities involved for phase modular approach? Like financials first and other modules. I have seen the phased approach specifically around payroll. It's doable, but it elongates the project usually by quite a bit. I've only been on one project that did that, and it became the focus was split between upgrading and getting people on one. It was almost like we were working three projects. We weren't just working one upgrade or migration project. I think because of Oracle's tools and the JDE, the JDE tool set and the migration path and the programs themselves, it has been, in my experience, more efficient to have it be a big bang and have everyone moved at the same time. Otherwise, you have basically splintered attentions on making sure everything's still talking. And Paul, you can probably speak to the whole server and the data talking to one another element of it, but it introduced a whole other set of
Yeah,
complex.
exactly. You're basically creating a whole new mini project inside the project,
Right,
which is how do I make sure my financials is now still talking back to distribution, to procurement, to these other systems. So
right.
integrations otherwise you would not have had to have built. Now you have to build these things to just run them for the next 6 to 9 months while you're finishing the project.
Right.
It dramatically increases the complexity. I'm sure there are use cases where it's still the appropriate thing to do, but for most
Mhm.
customers, don't avoid it if you can. You'll be money ahead.
And there's also the element of certain people staying behind and having the company's almost like splintered end user experience. That it kind of felt like an us them for a little bit on that project I was on. Um, the end user experience added more emotion, I think, than it probably needed.
Well, Brett, it looks like we are out of time.
Yep.
Yes.